Imagine a cold so aggressive it feels like a physical intruder standing in your room. Your breath freezes into ice crystals before it even leaves your lips. If your fire dies tonight, you don't just wake up cold, you might not wake up at all. This isn't an Arctic expedition, this is your bedroom. Welcome to the longest night of the Middle Ages. Hi guys. Tonight, we are going to slow down time. We are going to ease into a winter so profound, so absolute, that it changes the way you think about the very air in your lungs. Tonight, we leave the modern world behind. Forget your thermostat. Forget the hum of your radiator. Forget the electric blanket. We are traveling back to a time when heat was not a utility you paid for, but a treasure you hunted, captured, and guarded with your life. It is late December, the time of the deep freeze. The sun has already dipped below the horizon, and with its departure, the world has turned into a sculpture of ice and shadow. You are standing on a ridge overlooking the settlement. The air here does not just feel cold, it feels heavy. It presses against your skin with a physical weight. It is a dry, biting cold that pinches your cheeks with a sharpness that only deep winter can manage. Take a moment to feel your own body in this space. As you breathe in, the air enters your nose like tiny needles. It is so cold that the moisture in your nasal passages threatens to crystallize. You exhale and your breath turns white the moment it leaves your mouth. It creates a thick, swirling cloud of fog that lingers for a second before being torn apart by the wind. Look down at your feet. You are wearing heavy leather boots. But even through the thick soles, you can feel the ground. It is frozen solid. The mud of the path, usually soft and churning in autumn, has been transformed into rock-hard ridges. Snow packs hard under your boots as you trudge forward. Listen to the sound. It is not a wet splash. It is a crunch. A sharp, brittle creak crunch that echoes in the silence. This is a world of silence. Without the hum of engines, without the buzz of electricity, the winter night is incredibly quiet. But it is not empty. You feel the stillness of a world where the sun slips away early and gives almost nothing back. The trees around you are bare, their skeletal branches stripped of leaves, coated in a layer of hoarfrost that thickens with every passing hour. Frost thickens on every thatched roof in the village below. From where you stand, the roofs look like they have been plated in silver armor. Icicles cling to the timber frames like tiny glass knives. They are beautiful, yes, but they are also a warning. They tell you that the temperature has dropped far below freezing, perhaps dipping toward negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit. For a moment, just pause. Imagine sleeping here. Imagine trying to lower your heart rate and drift into unconsciousness in a place where the air wants to freeze you. You probably will not survive this without a plan, not without a few tricks. Not without learning how these villagers did it long before anything like central heating existed. As you begin to walk down the hill toward the village, notice how your body reacts. Your shoulders instinctively hunch up toward your ears. Your hands curl into fists inside your gloves. This is your biology fighting the atmosphere. Your body is pulling blood away from your extremities, sending it to your core to keep your heart and lungs warm. You are becoming a closed system, a fortress of heat trying to withstand a siege. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. If you want, tell me where you are listening from. Is it warm where you are? Or is the wind howling outside your window too? Now, dim the lights. Let the darkness of your room match the darkness of this medieval night. Feel yourself stepping deeper into the scene as the cold rises up around your ankles and your breath curls like pale smoke. You reach the perimeter of the village. The wind is blocked slightly by the buildings, but the air is still bitterly cold. You move farther into the village, and everything feels slow, careful, deliberate. Why? Because rushing wastes energy, and in a medieval winter, energy is everything. The air is so crisp that every whisper seems louder. You can hear the faint smell of wood smoke drifting between crooked cottages. It's an acrid, earthy smell, oak and ash burning slowly. It's the smell of survival. You hear a low creak as a door shifts in the wind. Someone inside is checking how much firewood is left for the night. You sense the worry in that gesture. Why worry? Because firewood has always been expensive in winter. Let's pause on that fact. A mainstream historical fact comes to mind. Medieval England faced heavy deforestation in several regions by the late Middle Ages, which made fuels scarce and valuable. This isn't just a fact in a textbook. It is a reality that shapes this entire night. It shapes the way every family prepares for sleep, and it shapes the way you breathe as you step closer to the nearest doorway. Every log placed on the fire is a calculation. Every ember is a coin of gold. You are standing now in front of a small peasant cottage. A tiny window glows from within. It is a weak, flickering orange light struggling against the massive blue darkness of the night. You reach out a gloved hand to push the door open. The wood is rough and freezing to the touch. You are about to enter the first layer of defense. You are about to see how humanity fought the Ice Age with nothing but wood, mud, and instinct. Take a deep breath of the icy air. Hold it. Now, let's go inside. You slip inside the cottage. The door closes behind you with a heavy thud, shutting out the wind. The change in atmosphere is immediate, but it is not what you might expect. It is not hot in here. It is simply less cold. The warmth from the room feels weak but comforting. It wraps around your frozen face like a thin, soft towel. Your eyes adjust to the gloom. The only light comes from the center of the room. A smoky fire smolders in the hearth. This is the heart of the home. In a medieval cottage, the hearth is not just an appliance. It is a member of the family. It is the thing that cooks the food, dries the clothes, and keeps death at bay. The villagers are finishing their evening tasks. Watch them. They move with a kind of sacred efficiency. They eat something thick and hot, maybe pottage made from whatever root vegetables they managed to store before the first freeze. You can smell the earthy steam rising from the pot. It smells of turnips, onions, and perhaps a bit of salted pork fat. You stand quietly and watch how careful everyone is with their movements. They are trying not to let too much heat escape. Every time someone moves too quickly, they stir the air, creating a small draft. They know that the moment they open the door, cold floods in like a living creature. But now, the most critical moment of the night has arrived. The meal is done. The tools are put away. It is time for the fire ritual. The family begins settling for bed. They move slowly. You watch them approach the hearth. They are about to bank the fire. This is a term we have lost in the modern world. We flip a switch or we turn a dial. But for them, fire is a living thing that sleeps. Banking the fire means they pull ashes forward to smother the flame, but protect the hidden coals. Why do they do this? Why not let it roar all night? Because wood is scarce. They cannot afford to burn logs while they sleep. But they also cannot afford to let the fire die completely. If the coals die overnight, the cold will punish them for it. Imagine waking up in a house that is -10 degrees inside. Imagine having to strike flint and steel with frozen, numb fingers, trying to catch a spark on damp tinder in the pitch black. It is a nightmare they must avoid at all costs. Matches did not exist. Lighting a new flame was a frustrating method that required practice and luck. So, keeping the fire alive overnight was the safer choice. Watch the woman of the house. She kneels on the hard-packed earthen floor. She holds a long iron poker, or perhaps a simple wooden stick, as historians still argue whether rural households use particular tools or just bare hands with rags. The exact method remains uncertain because written records are limited, but the intent is clear. She rakes the gray, powdery ash from the edges of the hearth. She piles it carefully over the glowing red embers. This is a delicate operation. It is chemistry and physics in action, understood through intuition. If she covers them too tightly, she will cut off all oxygen, and the fire will suffocate and die. If she covers them too loosely, too much oxygen will get in. The coals will burn out too fast, and they will wake up to cold ash. She has to find the perfect balance, a slow, suffocated smolder. She presses the ashes carefully with a wooden tool. You can hear the soft hiss of the embers protesting as they are buried. The bright orange light in the room begins to fade. Shadows lengthen and swallow the corners of the cottage. The room is growing darker, and with the darkness comes the cold. There is a quiet tension to it. The children are watching. The husband is watching. The entire safety of the night rests on this pile of ash. As you look around, another detail catches your attention. A small bundle rests near the hearth. It looks like a lump of twigs, cloth, and something odd. When you crouch down for a better look, you realize it is a quirky, warming charm. Some families tucked odd items such as dried frog skins or carved wooden tokens into pockets or bedding for luck against winter chills. Think about that for a moment. A dried frog skin. It seems ridiculous to us, but that strangeness feels both whimsical and desperate. People took comfort wherever they could find it, even if that comfort came from a superstition that lasted only through long nights. It was a psychological shield. If you believe the frog skin keeps the frost demon away, perhaps you sleep a little deeper. Perhaps your heart rate slows down a little more. The fire is now fully banked. The hearth is just a mound of gray dust. But if you hold your hand over it, you can feel the heat radiating up through the ash. It is a faint warmth that will soon become even weaker as midnight settles in. You shift your attention away from the dying light and look at the rest of the room. The fire is asleep. Now the family must rely on the house itself. You turn to look at the walls. You lean back against the wall of the cottage. It is cold. Not freezing like the air outside, but it sucks the heat right out of your shoulder. You shift your attention to the cottage walls. They are not made of brick or insulated drywall. They are made with wattle and daub, a mix of mud, clay, straw, and small stones. Picture how this was made. The wattle is a woven lattice of wooden strips, like a basket. The daub is the sticky, muddy mixture plastered over it. It is primitive, but it is effective. It is the skin of the house. The surface looks uneven, and the wooden beams creak softly with each gust of wind. You run your gloved fingers along the wall and feel the tiny vibrations. The house is trembling. The wind outside is hitting it with tremendous force, and the timber frame is flexing to absorb the energy. It is not much of a barrier against cold, and you know it. The people living here know it too. As your eyes adjust to the near darkness, you notice the imperfections. The drying mud has cracked over time. The wood has shrunk in the dry winter air. These create gaps, tiny, invisible highways for the cold air to enter. You feel it on your cheek, a thin, razor-sharp stream of icy air slicing through the smoky warmth of the room. They have stuffed gaps with moss and scraps of cloth in hopes of slowing the icy drafts. Look at the corner near the floor. You see a clump of dried green moss jammed desperately into a crack between the wall and the floorboards. In your modern life, you might worry about efficiency ratings or insulation codes. You might check the R value of your windows. Here, everything is survival. Every rushed repair or rough patch of clay could be the difference between a tolerable night and frozen fingers. Imagine the father of this family, earlier that day, walking around the outside of the house, looking for cracks. Imagine him mixing fresh mud with his bare hands, the freezing mixture numbing his skin, just to patch a hole the size of a coin. Because he knows that coin-sized hole will let the winter in. Your breath fogs as you inhale the smoky air. The ventilation in here is poor. The smoke from the banked fire has nowhere to go but up into the thatch or out through the eaves. It hangs in the air, a gray haze. You notice a faint scent of rotting rushes from the floor mixed with the smell of wool and unwashed clothes. The floor isn't wood or carpet. It is packed earth covered in dried plants called rushes. They have been there for months. They absorb moisture, spills, and dirt. This sensory blend, strange as it is, brings a sense of closeness. It smells human. It smells of life huddled together. These families depended on each other and their environment in ways you rarely imagine. The cold does that. It presses everyone into the same space. It turns rooms into ecosystems filled with whispers, sniffles, and the gentle shifting of tired bodies. There are no separate bedrooms here, no privacy doors, just one room, one fire, and the night. One of the villagers glances at you with a knowing look. You get the sense that strangers stand out in winter because nothing moves freely during this season. Movement burns calories. Movement exposes you to the wind, so people stay still. People stay indoors when they can. Animals huddle in barns. The village paths are empty except for a stray dog or someone fetching water from a frozen stream. You understand how isolation becomes part of the nightly rhythm. Winter sleep is not just a biological need. It is a strategy. It is a way to pass the time when you cannot work, cannot see, and cannot afford to burn calories. You sleep to save fuel. You sleep to save food. You sleep to survive. As the drafts swirl around your ankles, you realize that the house is losing the battle. The banked fire is fading. The walls are leaking heat. The temperature is dropping minute by minute. So, how do they survive the next 8 hours? They have to create a second layer of defense. The house is the first shell. Now, they must build a second shell around their own bodies. You watch as they begin to undress, or rather, redress. As you ease into the corner of the room, watching the family prepare, you become acutely aware of your own clothing. You allow the warm weight of your clothing to press against your shoulders. You are likely wearing modern fabrics, smooth cotton, synthetic fleece, maybe a down jacket. But here, the technology of warmth is different. It is organic. It is heavy. Thick wool scrapes your skin. You shift in place and feel the coarse texture catching on your sleeves. It is not comfortable by modern standards, but it works. Wool is a miracle material for the medieval peasant. It holds in heat, traps body warmth, and promises some measure of safety. Even when wet, wool retains its insulating properties. In a damp, leaky cottage, that property is worth more than gold. You close your eyes for a moment. You imagine how villagers layered linen, wool, and sometimes fur. It starts with linen. Linen is made from flax. It is smoother, cooler. This is the layer that touches the skin. It absorbs sweat. It is the hygiene layer. Then comes the wool. This is the thermal layer. Then, perhaps, a skin, sheepskin or rabbit fur, if they are lucky. You hear the faint crackle of the fire as a coal breaks apart. A spark flares and dies. Your mind drifts to another thought. The cold changes sound. It sharpens it. Every small noise becomes distinct. The roof timbers pop as frost expands them. Pop. Creak. It sounds like the house is stretching its bones. A faint whistle slips through a tiny gap in the window frame. A baby fusses for a moment before falling quiet again. You listen to these sounds as though they are part of a lullaby made for difficult nights. Each sound reminds you that this cottage is alive. That warmth is a fragile but shared effort. The family is not taking off their clothes to put on pajamas. The concept of pajamas doesn't exist here. In fact, on the coldest nights, they might not take off much at all. You watch the father. He is wearing a tunic that looks like it has been mended 100 times. He pulls a second tunic over the first. It is cumbersome. He looks bulky, but he doesn't care about fashion. He cares about the trapped air between the layers. Now, look at their heads. This is crucial. A young boy wanders over and holds up a tiny wool cap. He pats his head, then hands it to you with a grin. He wants you to try it on. You slip the cap over your head. It fits snugly, covering your ears. Warmth spreads almost instantly. The boy beams, clearly pleased. He begins explaining, or miming, that everyone in the house sleeps with caps. Why? Because cold air collects near the ceiling and floor, and the head loses heat more quickly than people expect. His father chimes in with a playful detail. He tells you that in some villages, people believed sleeping without a nightcap let winter spirits nibble at your thoughts, making your dreams confused or restless. It is a small piece of folklore shared with a laugh, but remembered as part of the seasonal rhythm. The winter spirits are just a metaphor for the headache you get when you sleep in a freezing draft. But the cap solves the problem. The mother hands you a woolen tunic so you can understand its weight. You lift it, surprised by how solid it feels. It seems less like clothing and more like armor against winter. When you press the fabric to your cheek, It scratches, but it also radiates a sense of protection. You imagine wearing it to bed, letting that weight settle over your tired limbs. In this world, weight equals comfort. But clothing is just the personal shell. The family is not going to sleep in separate beds. That would be suicide. They are about to engage in the most efficient heating strategy known to nature. They are about to build a human furnace. You take one final long breath. The air is heavy, smoky, and warm in the way that only a small fire in a tightly packed room can be. You sense that the night ahead will teach you more. It will show you how people adapted to cold that would send most modern sleepers running for heated blankets. You feel your body growing quieter as you wait for the next part of the journey. The family is moving toward the corner of the room where the straw mattress lies. They are not moving as individuals anymore. They are moving as a unit. You stay in the peasant cottage only a little longer before slipping back outside into the cutting dark. But before you go, you witness the final, most crucial defensive maneuver of the night. You watch the formation of the sleeping cluster. In the modern world, we prize our personal space. We have king-size beds, separate rooms, and individual duvets. We define luxury by how much space we have to ourselves. But here, space is the enemy. Space is air, and air is cold. To survive a night that drops to minus 20 degrees, privacy must be sacrificed on the altar of warmth. You watch the family preparing the sleeping space. They arrange bedding close to the fire, but not too close because sparks are dangerous. They lay out coarse blankets, woolen coverings, and old cloaks. They know exactly where the warmest patch of floor is, and you see them moving toward it like instinct. This is not a random pile of bodies. It is a carefully engineered structure. You observe how the family builds heat like a small living furnace. Everybody becomes part of the insulation. Watch the order of operations. The children curl up first, tucking their feet into warm pockets of fabric. Why the children first? Because they have the smallest body mass. They lose heat the fastest. They are the coals that need the most protection. They crawl to the middle of the mattress, creating a core of warmth. Then, the adults settle around them in layers. The parents flank the outer edges. They act as the shield wall. Their backs face the cold room. Their chests face the warm children. It is a biological embrace that has kept the human species alive through ice ages. You feel the way warmth gathers slowly like water filling a cup. It is a tangible shift in the air. If you were to place a thermometer in the center of that cluster, it would register a temperature significantly higher than the room just 2 feet away. This is the communal warmth trick, the secret that medieval villagers relied upon when the cold became too sharp to handle individually. One mainstream historical fact supports this. In many parts of medieval Europe, it was common for multiple households to sleep in the same large room during winter. Imagine that for a moment. Not just your immediate family, but perhaps an aunt, a cousin, or a neighbor whose roof had collapsed. Especially in smaller communities where housing was flexible and communal expectations were familiar, you might find 10 people huddled in a space meant for 4. You feel the heat of their presence, the soft hum of their conversations, the way their gathered breaths raise the temperature by small degrees. It changes the atmosphere of the room. It turns the cottage from a cold wooden box into a living organism. There is a term for this in certain regions: A woman with kind eyes leans in and whispers a quirky tidbit. They called it borrowing heat. You consider that phrase, borrowing heat. It implies that warmth is a currency. It is something you can lend and something you can owe. I will keep your back warm tonight if you keep the draft off my feet. It is a silent contract signed every evening when the sun goes down. Some households believe that sleeping between two particularly warm people could cure colds or fend off evil spirits that thrived in winter darkness. You can see the logic. If the cold is death, then the heat of a body is life. To be sandwiched between life is to be healed. You realize you are watching a survival strategy disguised as closeness. You also notice the smells that come with it. Warm wool, damp clothing, cooked vegetables, and the faint musk of unwashed bodies all mix into a scent that feels lived in rather than foul. In our sterilized world, this might seem unpleasant, but here, it is the smell of safety. It is the smell of warmth in a cold world. You picture yourself lying between strangers, sharing breath with people you met only hours ago. It sounds uncomfortable by modern standards, but here it feels natural. The cold does not care about personal space. It encourages people to become a single-layered organism made of cloth and skin and slow breathing. You watch them settle. They shift and wiggle until they fit together like puzzle pieces. A knee here, an elbow there. Eventually, the movement stops. The breathing synchronizes. The cluster has entered sleep mode. You stand quietly, not wanting to disturb them. The fire pops one last time, sending a weak shower of sparks up the chimney. The room is silent, save for the wind outside and the rhythmic breathing of the human pile. You have seen how they use each other. Now you need to see what they are sleeping on. You leave the sleeping family and slip out into the night. The cold hits you like a slap, resetting your senses. You walk to the next cottage, guided by the crunch of snow under your boots. You want to understand the foundation of their sleep. You want to understand the bed itself. We often think of a bed as a piece of furniture, a rectangle with springs and foam. But in a medieval peasant cottage, a bed is a process. It is something you build, maintain, and rebuild constantly. You enter a cottage where a family is preparing a fresh bed for the night. You smell it immediately. Straw. Dry, golden straw. A scent that is both dusty and warm. A quiet reminder of how simple materials shaped medieval rest. They are spreading layers of straw across a wooden frame, sculpting it into a shape that looks almost like a nest. The movement is rhythmic and patient. They do not just dump the straw, they arrange it. You kneel beside the bed and reach out. The fibers crunch softly beneath your fingers. They bend, then spring back slightly. Straw is deceiving. It looks crude, a byproduct of the harvest, but it is clever in the way it traps air. Each stalk is a hollow tube. When you pile thousands of them together, you create millions of tiny pockets of dead air. That trapped air becomes insulation. It is the exact same physical principle used in modern high-tech sleeping pads and down jackets. A commonly acknowledged detail among medieval historians is that straw bedding was replaced fairly often during winter because fresh straw provided better warmth and cleanliness than old flattened bundles. Old straw gets crushed, it loses its loft, it stops trapping air, it becomes a cold, hard mat. So, fluffing the bed or adding new straw is not just about softness, it is about reinflating the insulation. These mattresses were often renewed or fluffed during the day so that the fibers trapped air. You watch the father lifting armfuls of straw, shaking them out. Dust motes dance in the low light of the embers. He is aerating the bed. But straw has its downsides. It can be scratchy, it can harbor bugs. So they add layers. One of the children spreads a thin linen sheet over the straw, smoothing it with small, determined hands. Linen is the barrier. It protects the skin from the sharp stalks. After the linen comes a thicker woolen layer, softening the mattress further. You watch the process with quiet fascination. You see how each layer transforms the rough base into something more forgiving. You notice the smell, too. New straw has its own personality. A little sweet, a little dusty, carrying echoes of summer fields now frozen under layers of frost. An older man smiles at you and taps the straw mattress. He gestures for you to lie down, just to feel it. You lower yourself slowly, letting your weight settle into the uneven surface. The mattress crackles beneath you, warm in some spots and cooler in others. It is loud. Every time you move, the bed talks back. Crunch, rustle, shift. But gradually you understand its charm. The bed shapes itself around you like a loose cradle. It holds you. The man leans closer and shares something peculiar. He says that in some villages, families mixed aromatic plants like meadowsweet or lavender into their straw bedding. Why? Because they believed the scents kept pests away and encouraged better dreams. Imagine that. You are sleeping on a floor of dirt in a room that is freezing cold. But every time you roll over, a puff of lavender scent rises up to meet you. It is a small fragment of folklore passed on with pride. The idea of a fragrant medieval mattress feels unexpectedly charming, almost luxurious in a world built around survival. He also adds that people sometimes carried bits of straw in their clothes throughout the day without noticing. A little sign that comfort clung to them wherever they went. Comfort sticking to them like a quiet companion. Then he laughs softly and mentions an odd detail he remembers from his youth. He says that some people believed mice chose the warmest houses based on the scent of straw, and that families used this as a humorous way to brag about whose home was coziest. Even the mice prefer my bed, they might say. You spend a moment in silence watching the family drift towards sleep. The room grows dimmer. The fire sinks lower. You realize that the bed is not just a place to lie down. It is a tool. It is a crafted environment designed to counter the specific threats of the environment. The straw insulates from below. The wool insulates from above. The people insulate from the sides. It is a perfect system. But insulation only traps heat. It doesn't create it. The bodies provide the heat. But where does that heat come from? It comes from fuel. Not wood fuel, but food fuel. You stand up from the straw mattress, brushing the golden stalks from your clothes. You say goodbye to the family and step back into the cold. The wind has picked up. It cuts through your layers, finding the skin of your neck. You shiver. You need heat. And in the medieval mind, there are two fires, the one in the hearth and the one in the belly. You walk toward another cottage where a light still burns. You smell something rich and comforting drifting through its walls. It is a dense, savory smell. Meat, fat, roasted oats, perhaps a hint of onion. Your stomach tightens. You push the door open and step inside, greeted instantly by a wave of warm, savory air. A family gathers around a wooden table. A pot sits near the hearth, its sides glistening faintly with grease. We tend to think of medieval food as bland or scarce, but on a winter night, the evening meal is a strategic operation. They are not just eating for taste, they are eating for thermal mass. A woman ladles steaming stew into small bowls, each portion topped with a glimmering layer of fat that has not yet solidified. Fat is energy. Fat is heat. In a cold climate, calories are the only currency that matters. The man of the house gestures for you to join them. You sit, feeling the heat rise from the pot. Steam curls into the air, carrying aromas that seem almost unreal after breathing frozen air for so long. The woman explains that they always eat something hearty before sleeping on winter nights. The cold drains energy quickly. A full stomach protects the body from losing heat too fast. She is describing thermogenesis, the process of your body producing heat as it digests food. Digestion is work. Work creates heat. The stomach is a furnace. You watch as she dips the ladle again, lifting a thicker mixture from the bottom of the pot. It contains barley, bits of salted pork, and small chunks of root vegetables grown in their garden before the frost set in. It is called pottage. It is thick, almost like a mortar. It sticks to the spoon. The father explains that food like this is not only nourishment, but preparation for sleep. Oats, barley, and meat provide slow-burning energy that lasts through the coldest hours. If they ate a light salad, they would wake up freezing by 2 a.m. But this heavy, dense starch sits in the stomach like a slow-burning log. It releases energy gradually, keeping the internal fire burning until dawn. He adds that when the family is fortunate enough to have butter or suet, they mix it into their evening pottage. Even a spoonful helps. You glance at the pot and notice droplets of golden fat shimmering on the surface. One of the older boys explains that they sometimes add dried peas to the pottage, especially on nights when the wind rattles the shutters with extra force. He leans across the table and grins, saying that peas stick to your ribs and keep you warm even if the fire dies. The mother offers you a small bowl filled with something darker. When you peer inside, you see small chunks of preserved meat and a thick glaze of rendered fat. She explains that this is winter stock, kept in the coldest corner of the cottage. It tastes strong, salty, and dense. It coats your tongue with richness and clings to the back of your throat as you swallow. You can feel the warmth traveling down your esophagus, landing in your stomach, and radiating outward. It is an internal radiator turning on. She shares a detail that rural families often repeated among themselves. They believed that eating fatty foods before sleep made dreams more stable and restful. Whether this superstition has roots in biology or imagination does not matter. It brought comfort. As you eat, you notice a small pot near the hearth filled with something else. It simmers slowly. The father explains that it is a tonic made by boiling herbs like nettle, elderberry, and yarrow. Some villagers drink it before bed to ward off the winter shivers. He hands you a small wooden cup. The liquid smells sharp with herbs and faintly bitter. You take a sip. It warms your throat immediately, spreading heat into your chest. A girl sitting across the table tells you that her grandmother insists this tonic keeps frost from settling too deeply into the bones. She shrugs, unsure if the old saying holds truth, but she drinks it anyway because it tastes like family tradition. The father nods and adds another piece of local wisdom. Heavy meals help villagers sleep longer, and long sleep helps them avoid hourly exposure to the cold. The less they have to wait for hunger, the less they must brave the freezing air inside the cottage. Think about that. Sleep is a way to skip the cold. Food is the fuel that allows that time travel to happen. The family finishes their meal. They look heavier now, slower, more satisfied. The furnace is stoked. They are ready to hibernate. But not everyone relies solely on their own body heat. Some villagers have discovered a way to steal heat from another species entirely. You leave the warm, food-filled cottage. The transition is brutal. The sweat that formed on your brow while eating the hot pottage instantly turns cold on your skin. You pull your collar up. You continue down the icy path, guided by faint sounds that roll through the night. Low grunts, shuffling hooves, the muffled rustle of hay. These are the voices of the winter night's true survivors. You follow the noise until you reach a sturdy timber building attached to a small cottage. It is a barn, but look closely. Warm breath curls from gaps between the boards, glowing in the moonlight like mist rising from hidden springs. The building is leaking heat, not fire heat, but living heat. You step closer and smell it instantly. The deep, earthy scent of livestock, warm hide, dried hay, old straw. It is a dense aroma, pungent to modern noses, but familiar and grounding to the medieval villager. You push open the barn door. You step into heat so sudden that you inhale sharply out of surprise. The barn radiates warmth in a way you have not felt in any human dwelling so far. It is different from the fire. Fire is dry and sharp. This heat is humid, heavy, and biological. Animals create their own climate. Their bodies release steady heat, and the thick bedding beneath them insulates it further. A 1,000-pound cow is essentially a massive walking radiator that runs at 101 degrees Fahrenheit. Put 3 of them in a sealed wooden box and you have central heating. You pause, letting your eyes adjust to the dim lantern hanging near the door. The light reveals cows shifting lazily, a pair of goats chewing cud even at this late hour, and a few chickens perched on a beam, feathers puffed out like tiny winter coats. A man sits on a wooden stool near a cow, mending a harness. He looks up and greets you. He gestures for you to come in and close the door to keep the warmth inside. You do, and the temperature rises even more, embracing you like a heavy blanket. The difference is astonishing. Outside, the cold stings. In here, it feels almost like early spring. The man explains that during the harshest winters, families often slept in or near the barn, especially if their house was poorly insulated. He chuckles softly and says that cows are more reliable than fire because they never let their body heat drop. A fire can go out. A cow keeps burning until it dies. He invites you to follow him into a corner where a raised wooden platform sits beneath a thick overhang. On the platform rests a simple bed made of straw covered with a coarse wool blanket. He pats the blanket and tells you that sometimes on the coldest nights, his family moves out here to sleep with the animals. It was never considered shameful. It was considered sensible. You sit on the edge of the platform. You run your hand through the straw. Above you, the cow flicks its ears, shifting its weight with a low rumble. A wave of warm air rolls over you again. The cow's breath steams the air in soft puffs. The man laughs quietly and shares a light-hearted piece of rural wisdom. He says that goats are better companions than cows because goats wiggle closer, while cows prefer to remain dignified and keep their distance. He follows the joke with a story about a neighbor who claimed his goat once stole his blanket during the night. He steps over to a pig pen where a pair of plump pigs nestle together under a mound of hay. Pigs generate remarkable warmth. Some families would let them sleep in attached sheds or even in special corners of the house. You watch the pigs breathe in slow tandem, their bodies radiating heat like small furnaces. The man taps the fence gently and says that pigs are loyal sources of warmth, though not exactly scent-free. You smile despite the lingering odor. The man now gestures toward the main cottage entrance that connects to the barn. He explains that in some homes, the cottage and the animal shelter shared a wall so warmth could seep from one into the other. He lifts a lantern and points to the wooden boards in the shared wall. They are warm to the touch. The animals on the other side breathe, shifting gently, and their warmth passes through. This is symbiotic survival. The humans feed the animals. The animals warm the humans. A young girl enters the barn with a small basket of grain. Her cheeks are pink from the cold outside. She sprinkles the grain into a wooden trough and pats the side of a goat affectionately. She smiles shyly and tells you this is her favorite place in winter. She says the barn feels like a big breathing blanket wrapped around all of them. A breathing blanket. You repeat the words in your mind. It is a perfect description. This place is alive. It is a shared lung, exhaling warmth against the frozen night. You thank the family and step back toward the barn door. When you push it open, the cold greets you again with icy teeth. But this time, you carry a different understanding of warmth. Warmth isn't just fire. Warmth is biology. Warmth is connection. You have seen how the peasants survive. But what about those who have resources? What about the architecture of the house itself? How do you modify a room to fight the cold? You leave the warm, humid air of the barn and step back into the night. The sweat on your skin cools instantly, a sharp reminder that you are still at the mercy of the elements. You pull your collar tight and walk toward another cottage, guided by the faint glow leaking through the shutters. This cottage feels different. The roof is steeper, the walls thicker. As you step inside, you notice long strips of fabric hanging near the doorway, pulling slightly in the draft. The air here is still cold, but there is a sense of enclosure, of layers protecting the center. You step further inside and immediately see why. Heavy bed curtains dominate the room, enclosing the sleeping area in thick folds of fabric. In the modern world, bed curtains are decorative. We think of them as lacy, airy things meant to look romantic. But here, they are engineering. They are a room within a room. A man sits near the bed, carefully brushing a curtain panel with a stiff bristle broom to remove dust. He looks up, smiles, and invites you to come closer. You move toward the bed and feel the temperature shift with each step. The air surrounding the enclosed space is noticeably warmer than the rest of the room. You part the curtains slightly. A breath of warm air sighs against your face like a gentle welcome. It is startling. Outside the curtain, the air is crisp and moving. Inside, the air is still, heavy, and warm. You run your hand along the inside of the curtain. It is not thin cotton. It is thick, almost quilted, layers of woolen cloth stitched together. It feels heavy, like a winter coat hanging vertically. The woman of the house explains that fabric like this does not flow easily, and that is the point. The less air that moves through it, the more heat stays trapped inside. She smiles and adds that in some households, bed curtains were so prized that they were mentioned in dowries, passed between generations, or even used to settle debts. Imagine that, a curtain as currency. But after standing here, feeling the heat radiate from the fabric, you understand why. In winter, warmth is wealth. She invites you to sit on the mattress. When you do, the curtain fabric falls behind you with a soft thump. The enclosed bed suddenly feels like a warm bubble, sealed off from the relentless cold outside. The acoustics change instantly. Outside, the wind whistles faintly through the gaps in the shutters, but the curtain muffles it until it becomes nothing more than a distant hum. The silence inside is profound. It feels safe. It feels like a secret. You suddenly feel the cocoon effect that medieval people depended on. It is a small sanctuary born from fabric and breath. The husband points out the wooden frame above the bed that supports the curtains. He explains that the frame must be strong enough to carry the weight of the cloth, which grows heavier in winter as dampness creeps in from the breath of sleeping bodies. He knocks on the frame lightly, and the wood answers with a dull, confident sound. As the woman adjusts the blanket, she explains something often repeated in studies of medieval domestic life. Curtains were not just about keeping warmth in, they were also about privacy. Most families lived in one large room, so these curtains offered a rare sense of separation. Behind them, people whispered stories, shared secrets, or simply enjoyed the illusion of solitude. You imagine how precious that privacy must have felt after a day of constant work and shared space. You crouch down and look at the bottom of the curtains where they brush the floor. The edges are weighted with small stones sewn into the hem. You lift one slightly. It tugs downward, ensuring the curtain falls straight and seals the warm space more effectively. This detail surprises you. It is clever and subtle, a reminder of how people solved problems with creativity. The woman folds her hands and tells you that she sometimes reads to her children inside the curtains by candlelight, though very carefully because open flames near fabric are dangerous. She describes how the curtain glows softly when lit from inside, turning the bed into a tiny illuminated den. You picture that tender image, a mother reading stories in warm half-darkness while the cold wraps tightly around the outside walls. You stay there only long enough to appreciate the ingenuity of the design. You realize that they have essentially shrunk their house. They don't need to heat the room. They only need to heat this 6-foot by 6-foot box of wool. The husband adds that on the harshest nights, they sometimes hang an extra curtain layer, creating a second barrier that helps trap more warmth. He gestures to a folded curtain hanging neatly near the wall. You run your hand along its coarse surface. It feels heavy, like winter pressed into cloth. You step out of the curtained bed. The cold hits you immediately, like a physical weight returning to your shoulders. You realize just how effective that fabric wall was. You nod to the family and step back toward the door, ready to see another architectural trick. You continue through the sleeping village, your footsteps sinking into soft layers of snow that sparkle beneath the moonlight. You walk toward a cottage that looks different from the others. It is narrower and slightly taller, its upper floor jutting out over the lower one like a protective brow. When you ease the door open, a gentle pocket of warmth drifts out. It is not as strong as the heat in the wealthier home you visited, but it is unmistakably warmer than the open room you expect. You step inside, and suddenly the layout becomes clear. This house has a built-in sleeping niche carved directly into the wall. You stare at it with growing fascination. The niche is like a wooden box tucked into the structure of the house, raised slightly above the floor and enclosed on 3 sides by thick timber walls. A curtain hangs across the open side. When you push the curtain aside, a small compartment reveals itself, just large enough for 2 adults to lie curled within it. It looks like a cupboard for people, but in the bitter cold of winter, it is brilliant. A woman seated near the hearth looks up from her mending and smiles. She tells you softly that this niche has served her family for 3 generations. You crouch down and run your fingers along the smooth wood of the inner walls. Warmth lingers there. You notice that the wood seems slightly darker where years of body heat have soaked into it. It is polished by the friction of sleep, thousands of nights of turning over, of shoulders rubbing against oak. She invites you to climb in for a moment. You hesitate, then slide onto the mattress inside. The difference shocks you. Inside the niche, your breath warms the air quickly. The ceiling is low, barely a foot above your head, and the space is small enough that the cold cannot chase you. You feel like you are tucked inside the house itself, embraced by its structure. This is warmth created not by fire or luxury, but by clever design. The woman explains that these enclosed beds, sometimes called walled beds or tucked beds, became popular in certain regions because houses were drafty and heating fuel was limited. A widely repeated detail in architectural history notes that these niches trapped heat remarkably well, especially when paired with thick curtains. Imagine families sliding inside, drawing the curtain, and closing themselves into a warm cocoon. She points out that the shape of the house funnels cold air through certain corners, but never into the niche. The niche sits above the floor, where cold settles, but below the roof, where warm air escapes. It is positioned exactly where warmth lingers longest. A little boy runs over and crawls into the niche beside you. He sets down a small wooden horse carved from a scrap of oak. He tells you that this is his favorite place in the house because the niche feels like it hugs him. You laugh quietly as he snuggles deeper into the blankets. Children know warmth instinctively. To him, this isn't a cramped box. It is a fortress. It is a secret cave protected from snow spirits. The woman adds another detail, a bit of oral wisdom passed down by her ancestors. She explains that some people believed sleeping in enclosed spaces allowed dreams to grow clearer because the mind stayed warmer and more relaxed. Whether or not that is true, the idea feels charming. You settle against the back wall of the niche, letting your breath warm the small chamber. The space grows noticeably more comfortable after only a few minutes. You lean out of the niche and study the exterior structure more closely. The wooden frame surrounding it is thick. You notice that the builders reinforced it with additional planks, likely to block drafts that slip through the outer walls. Straw has been packed between the planks and sealed with a mixture of clay and hair. You press your hand against the wall. It is warmer than the rest of the room. The insulation makes a difference. The woman tells you that her family sleeps in the niche on the coldest nights, leaving the wider bed in the main room for storing spare blankets and clothing. In the deep freeze, they abandon the open room and retreat into the walls. As you step out of the niche and stretch your muscles, you realize the psychological power of this design. It is containment. It shrinks the world down to a manageable size. You thank the woman for letting you experience the niche. She nods warmly, then closes the curtain to save the warmth inside. The fabric rustles softly and falls into place. You stand for a moment, watching the gentle sway of the curtain before turning toward the door. You step back into the night, but you carry a memory of compact, sheltered comfort inside you. You leave the cozy wooden niche behind and walk deeper into the village. The snow crunches beneath your boots, louder now in the silence. Ahead, the land opens up, and you see the silhouettes of tall timbers rising against the stars. The building is larger than any cottage you have entered so far, with high walls and thick beams that cast long shadows in the moonlight. This must be the manor's great hall, the heart of warmth and authority in a medieval community. You approach the heavy door. Light seeps through its edges, warm and promising. When you push it open, a gust of heat washes against you in a slow wave. You inhale, letting your chest loosen with relief. The hall is enormous, far wider than the cottages scattered across the village. The ceiling disappears into darkness. But the smell is different here. It doesn't smell of damp wool and pottage. The air carries aromas of roasted grain, wood smoke, and resin. It smells of resources. It smells of abundance. Across the stone floor, the last fire of the evening still flickers, burning low, but glowing with a calm reddish hue that fills the hall with soft light. You step closer to the hearth, drawn as if by magnetism. The heat is stronger here than in the cottages. Even though the fire is fading, large stones around the hearth radiate stored warmth. This is the physics of wealth. Peasant cottages are made of wood and mud. They insulate, but they don't store heat well. This hall is made of stone. Stone is a thermal battery. It absorbs the roaring fire of the day and slowly releases it at night. You kneel and place your hand near the stones. The heat ripples upward gently, almost soothing your chilled fingers back to life. A servant explains that the great hall fire burns much longer than household hearths because it is built with large logs. He gestures to a thick, partially charred log resting in the embers. Its surface glows in streaks of deep orange. He tells you that these big logs are meant to last through most of the night, so the Lord's family and their guests do not wake in freezing conditions. In a cottage, you burn twigs and branches. In a manor, you burn ancient oaks. He crouches beside you and adds that the heat from the great hall often helps warm the surrounding chambers too, even if only slightly. It is the engine of the house. You glance across the hall. Tapestries along the walls flutter faintly with the movement of warm air. Their woven scenes of hunts and battles shimmer in the firelight. These are not just decorations, they are insulation. A bare stone wall is cold. A stone wall covered in thick wool tapestry is a barrier. The fabric creates a layer of dead air against the cold stone, preventing the room's heat from being sucked away. A young woman approaches carrying an armful of rushlights. She tells you that she and the others often sleep in the hall during harsh winter nights, spreading their blankets near the embers after the household retires to private chambers. The lingering heat offers more comfort than their cold servants' quarters. You realize that the great hall becomes a communal sleeping ground for the staff, a hierarchy of warmth where the closest spots to the fire are the most coveted. A man steps in from a side door wrapped in a heavy cloak He rubs his arms and tells you that this hall is built to trap heat. The high roof lets smoke drift upward, but the thick stone walls absorb warmth and release it slowly. He taps a wall with his knuckles. The stone feels warm under your touch. It is remarkable. In this age of thin walls and leaky roofs, this hall feels almost indulgent. He leads you to a smaller alcove at the edge of the hall. Inside, a bed made from layered blankets sits near a half-open window shutter. He explains that sometimes the younger servants compete for this sleeping spot because it is closest to the stones warmed by the hearth all day. He laughs and adds a small story. Last winter, 2 servants raced across the hall to claim this warm spot at bedtime, only to discover that the Lord's hound had already curled up there and refused to move. The group ended up sleeping around the dog, grateful for its warmth. Even in the manor, the biological need for warmth bridges the gap between human and animal. You stand again near the center of the hall. A slight crack from the hearth catches your attention. One of the embers breaks apart, revealing a brighter glow inside. A wave of heat sweeps outward, touching your face. You savor it, knowing that the fire will fade soon, and the hall will cool into another long winter night. But for now, the stone holds the memory of fire. You leave the communal warmth of the great hall and follow a steward into the private chambers. The air here is quieter, stiller. This is where the masters of the house sleep. The feather bed, the feather bed. You enter a room lit by a single chandelier of candles. A noblewoman sits near the hearth, while a maid folds thick blankets at the foot of the bed. The chamber feels layered with luxury. Soft furs draped over chairs, embroidered cushions stacked near the window. But your eyes are drawn to the bed. It is enormous. It rests atop a carved wooden frame, elevated proudly above the cold ground. You approach it slowly. The feather bed looks impossibly plush compared to the straw mattresses of the previous cottages. Its surface curves slightly, as if welcoming a tired body with open arms. A man of the house, dressed in a padded robe lined with fur, notices your interest and gestures for you to come closer. When you stand beside the feather bed, he pats it affectionately. You sink your hand into the top layer and feel it yield under your touch. Soft and buoyant, the feathers shift inside, adjusting to your pressure with a luxurious whisper. You almost expect warmth to bloom immediately beneath your palm. It feels like a small escape from the cold, hidden in plain sight. He explains that this feather bed belonged to his father and before that to his grandfather. These items lasted for generations when cared for properly. He mentions that goose down from well-tended flocks produced the warmest, lightest filling, prized even more than wool by those who could afford it. Feathers are nature's perfect insulator. They trap air in a chaotic matrix that stops heat transfer dead in its tracks. A straw mattress crunches and flattens. A feather bed hugs and lofts. He tells you something widely noted in economic histories. Feather beds were so valuable that they often appeared in wills, listed alongside land, livestock, or gold. Imagine leaving your mattress to your eldest son as his primary inheritance. That is how precious a good night's sleep was. His wife approaches holding a linen sheet she has just finished inspecting. The cloth is smooth, finer than most people could ever buy. She spreads it over the featherbed with calm precision. Next, she adds a quilt made of dyed wool squares stitched into patterns. Then she lifts a second quilt. You recognize something different in its weight and richness. This one is filled with down as well. When she unfolds it, the fabric drifts through the air with slow grace. You watch how it traps warmth almost immediately. She tells you they layer blankets in winter based on the cold. Tonight is especially harsh, so they will use both quilts. You imagine the weight and comfort of lying beneath them. It must feel like sleeping under a warm cloud. A girl, likely their daughter, approaches carrying a fur coverlet. The fur is soft and dark. She lays it across the foot of the bed. You brush it with your hand. It feels warm even before anyone touches it. Fur retains heat in a way that almost seems magical. She tells you that on the coldest nights, she pulls it all the way up to her chin. You picture her sleeping beneath it, safe from the icy winds. The father sets a wooden chest beside the bed and opens it. Inside are more blankets folded neatly. He chooses one made of thickly woven wool dyed in deep earthy colors. He spreads it across the bed as the final layer. The structure of the bedding now resembles a fortress built from comfort rather than stone. The feather bed base supports everything above it. Quilts and blankets lock in heat. The fur coverlet adds protection. The linen sheet provides softness against the skin. You feel grateful just looking at it. This isn't just a bed, it is a life raft. In a world where the night can kill you, this bed is a guarantee of tomorrow. The noblewoman pours a small drink from a clay pot resting by the hearth. She offers some to you. It is warm, spiced wine flavored with cloves and cinnamon. The warmth spreads through your throat and into your chest like an ember. She tells you the drink helps relax the body before sleep. Spice is precious but healing, especially in winter. You step back, feeling the last ripples of heat drift from the fireplace toward your cheeks. You have seen the height of luxury. Now you must return to the cold to see how the other half survives, the travelers on the road and the monks in their cells. You leave the luxurious chamber of the featherbed, but before we move on to the colder corners of the world, we must examine one specific tool that bridges the gap between comfort and danger. In the corner of the room, sitting on a stool near the hearth, is a shallow metal pan with a long wooden handle attached. It looks like an oversized cooking skillet, but the lid is perforated with decorative holes. This is the bed warmer. The bed warmer is a technological attempt to defeat the initial shock of freezing sheets. You watch a woman crouch beside the hearth, holding a pair of tongs. The smell of warm iron drifts towards you. She isn't cooking food, she is cooking heat. She lifts the lid of the pan. Inside, she places glowing coals that flicker gently like sleepy fireflies. These are carefully selected embers, bright enough to radiate heat, but not flaming wild enough to spark instantly. She closes the lid and walks toward the bed. She slides the apparatus beneath the blankets. The bed rustles in response. You can almost see the heat spreading under the covers, creating a warm tunnel in the cold linen. It sounds simple, but the process requires skill. If you use too many coals, the metal becomes searing hot and the blankets scorch. She points to a dark mark on the pan where coals once burned too bright. That mark is a lesson learned. Her husband enters the room holding another bed warmer with a dent in its side. He jokes that the dent came from a time he dropped it in surprise when a coal popped unexpectedly. It is a reminder that they are essentially putting fire into their bed. It is a calculated risk. You watch the steam rise from the metal as it glides over the mattress. The warmth feels like a small sun trapped between layers of wool. But warming pans are expensive. Iron and brass are costly materials. So what do the villagers in the smaller cottages use? She shows you a basket of rounded stones sitting near the hearth. These are river stones, smoothed by water and time. They are darkened from years of heating and cooling cycles. Those who cannot afford a metal pan heat these stones instead. They roll them near the fire until they grow hot. Not red hot, just stone hot. You pick one up carefully. It is heavy, dense, and radiates a stubborn warmth, like holding a puff of sunlight. She takes one stone and wraps it in a scrap of wool cloth. Why the cloth? To protect the bed from scorching, but also to act as a regulator. The wool slows down the release of heat, making the stone last longer through the night. She tucks the bundle into the foot of the bed, patting it gently. This is a strategic placement. People believed warmth at the feet helped the entire body relax into sleep more easily. Cold feet were thought to disturb dreams and make the night feel longer. You imagine lying down on a winter night. Your head is cold, your nose is cold, but your feet find that hot woolen stone. The relief would be instantaneous. The husband demonstrates the technique with the metal pan again. He slides it along the sheets, creating a warm path. He warns you that bed warmers must be moved constantly. If you leave it in one spot for 30 seconds, you might burn a hole. He tells a story of his grandmother who once burned a hole clean through a treasured sheet, leaving a perfect round mark that the family joked about for years. Linen is durable, but it is vulnerable to live heat. The woman picks up a handful of herbs, rosemary, thyme, and dried apple peels. She sprinkles a little onto the coals inside the warming pan before closing the lid. The herbs crackle subtly, releasing sweet, smoky scents. This isn't just for smell. It is atmospheric engineering. The steam from the damp sheets mixes with the herbal smoke, infusing the bed with a scent that feels like summer. They rotate the pan inside the blankets, fold the quilt over it, and then, crucially, they remove it. They never sleep with the pan in the bed. That would be madness. They remove it at least 10 minutes before lying down. Once the pan is gone, the bed holds the warmth well enough to lull even the coldest bones into rest. You step back and observe the whole room. The flickering fire, the worn tools, the carefully handled bed warmer, the warm stones resting by the hearth. These are tools of active resistance against the winter. You leave the comfort of the heated stones and step back into the biting wind. You walk to the edge of the village where the cottages end and a different kind of structure begins. Ahead stands a low stone building with tall, narrow windows that gleam faintly in the moonlight. It is a monastery. It rises like a quiet guardian in the night, solemn and unmoving. Here, sleep is not just rest, it is a discipline. And warmth is not a right, it is a temptation to be managed. When you push the heavy wooden door open, a soft chant drifts from within. Inside, the air smells of wax, cold stone, and faint incense. The stone floor chills your boots instantly. A monk in a simple wool robe approaches. He leads you into the dormitory. It is a long room with tightly spaced wooden beds. There are no curtains here, no feather beds, no warming pans, just a row of thin mattresses stuffed with straw. The windows are small and unshuttered, allowing a faint line of moonlight to fall across the floor. A cold breeze flows gently along the corridor of beds, creeping beneath your clothing. The monk tells you that members of the order sleep together in the same space. This is partly for spiritual unity, but also for survival. They sleep close enough to share warmth. The body heat of 20 men raises the ambient temperature of the room just enough to prevent freezing. You kneel beside one of the beds. The wool blanket is coarse and thin. You lift it, and the cold air seeps through the fibers. He explains that fire is rarely allowed in the dormitory. Why? Because warmth encourages drowsiness, and drowsiness interferes with the strict schedule of worship. They are expected to wake several times during the night to pray. If the room were warm and toasty, the monks might sleep too deeply. They might miss the bell. So, the cold is a tool. It keeps the spirit alert. He offers a thoughtful detail. Monks believed enduring physical hardship strengthened spiritual focus. Cold nights, thin clothing, and simple beds reminded them to detach from earthly pleasures. It was not merely discomfort, it was devotion in physical form. A younger monk passes by carrying a small clay cup filled with water. He sets it beside his bed. The older monk points to it and says that on many nights the water freezes halfway through the dark hours. Imagine waking up to the sound of a bell at 2 a.m. You sit up in a freezing room. You reach for your water cup to rinse your mouth, and it is solid ice. Then you must stand up, walk on the frozen stone floor, and go to the chapel. You walk farther along the dormitory. The room is silent except for faint creaks of wood responding to the temperature. You touch a wall and feel frost forming in tiny crystals along the stone. It sparkles like a thin veil of stars captured indoors. A monk approaches you with a lantern. He explains that their wool robes double as sleeping garments. They rarely change before bed. Instead, they sleep in the same robes they wear during daily duties. This makes practical sense. Removing layers in this cold would be dangerous. The robe is heavy, scented with smoke and earth. It is a wearable blanket. He shares a small piece of monastery lore. During especially severe winters, monks sometimes slept with their hands tucked into their sleeves and their feet wrapped in spare cloth scraps. These scraps often came from torn habits or old prayer cloth. It was a humble solution. No fur, no velvet, just rags wrapped around toes to prevent frostbite. Suddenly, a bell chimes softly in a distant room. The sound is clear and sharp in the cold air. The monk lifts his head. It is time for the midnight prayer. You watch as the monks rise from their beds. They do not groan. They do not shiver visibly. They move with silence and purpose. They walk in a line through the freezing corridor, their breath fogging the air with quiet devotion. One monk lingers and speaks to you softly. He admits that some orders allowed heated rooms during extreme weather, while others insisted on cold as a test. His order believes winter refines patience. He shows you a small wooden chest containing a bundle of herbs, thyme, and mint. They burn these occasionally to freshen the dormitory, but never strong herbs that might distract the senses. A younger monk shows you a small trick they use. They place a tightly sealed clay jug filled with warm water under the straw mattress. It is a modest comfort, barely enough to notice, but meaningful when fire is forbidden. He laughs softly and admits some novices try to sneak warmer clothing into bed, only to be corrected. You stand quietly near the doorway as the monks disappear into the chapel. There is something humbling in this austerity. No curtains, no feather beds, just faith, discipline, and a shared room where each breath becomes part of a communal struggle against the night. You leave the silent, disciplined cold of the monastery and head back toward the main road. The wind is howling now, sweeping across the open fields. You spot a dim lantern swinging beside a low wooden building. It is wider than a cottage and lacks the decorative touches of a manor. It is an inn for travelers. The wooden door rattles in the wind, but warm sounds reach you through the cracks. A muffled laugh, the scrape of a bench. When you enter, a breath of warm air meets you, mixed with the scents of ale, roasted oats, and damp wool drying near the hearth. This is the smell of humanity on the move. A group of travelers huddle at a long table, cloaks steaming as they thaw. Their cheeks glow red, their boots drip melted snow onto the floor, and their hands tremble with exhaustion. You make your way to the hearth, where thick logs burn with slow confidence. The innkeeper sets a clay mug beside you, hot ale flavored with a pinch of ginger. You drink it, and the warmth spills into your chest. He explains that travelers often stagger into his inn half-frozen. Some arrive alone, some with animals. You glance toward the far corner where a wanderer lies wrapped in a thick cloak. A small fire pot sits on the floor beside him. This is a fascinating object. It is a clay pot filled with warm embers covered with a perforated lid. The traveler uses it like a portable hearth, cradling it against his chest or setting it by his feet during sleep. The innkeeper tells you that these fire pots are precious companions on winter roads. They glow for hours, offering enough heat to keep frost from settling into bones. You kneel beside the traveler's fire pot. You place your hand near the small holes in the lid and feel gentle warmth escaping. The traveler shifts and tells you he bought the pot from a merchant who claimed it would outlast 3 winters. It kept him alive last night when he slept in a half-collapsed barn miles from here. He explains that roadside barns often become makeshift shelters. People seek these spaces not because they are comfortable, but because they block the wind. You move across the room and sit near a pair of younger travelers. They tell you that last night they took shelter in a ferry shed by the river. They found bundles of straw inside and piled them into a makeshift bed, layering their cloaks on top. The girl laughs softly as she recalls how the wind rattled the shed walls. She says she pretended the noise came from spirits, but she was grateful for the wooden barrier. The boy adds that travelers share everything in winter: food, blankets, fire pots, information about shelter ahead. On the frozen roads, kindness matters as much as skill. People trust strangers because cold makes everyone equal. The innkeeper returns carrying a tray of bread and cheese. He tells you that in winter, inns never refuse a traveler. Even if beds are full, there is always room near the fire. When storms trap wanderers for days, The common room becomes a temporary community of exhausted people keeping one another awake and warm with stories. He leads you to a narrow doorway that opens to the sleeping quarter for visitors. Inside, several travelers rest on raised wooden platforms lined with straw and wrapped in blankets. You notice something interesting. Most travelers sleep fully clothed. Cloaks remain wrapped around their bodies. Boots sit nearby, ready to be slipped on in seconds. The innkeeper explains that winter travelers rarely undress at night. They keep garments on to preserve warmth, but also to stay prepared should they need to flee a collapsing roof or help shovel snow blocking the door. He shows you a stack of extra blankets stored in a chest. They're coarse wool, washed rarely, but dependable. He lifts one and places it over a sleeping man's shoulders. The gesture is gentle. You sense that this innkeeper has performed such acts countless times. He shares a bit of remembered wisdom. Always bank the fire before dawn. Always keep a pot of warm ale on the hearth. Always store extra straw for unexpected guests. And never let a traveler wander away alone if the sky darkens with frost clouds. He shares a quiet thought, often echoed in winter tales. Travelers carry stories from far places. In winter, those stories become part of the warmth. People listen not only for entertainment, but also for direction, for warnings, for hope. You step outside to breathe the cold again. The inn's lantern sways in the wind. The world out here is still dangerous, but knowing that people find shelter in barns, ferry sheds, inns, or even beside warm beasts gives you a sense of how resilient humans have always been. You leave the crowded warmth of the inn and walk deeper into the quiet village. The wind has died down slightly, but the air remains fiercely cold. You smell something faint in the air. Not smoke, not manure, but something sharp and sweet. You follow the scent to a small cottage. Bunches of dried plants hang along the lintel. You open the door and step inside. Warm air perfumed with herbs wraps around you at once. The fragrance is complex: lavender, chamomile, rosemary, and dried mint. A woman stands near the fire crushing dried leaves in a wooden mortar. She is the village healer. She looks up, wipes her hands on her apron, and invites you to come closer. She explains that these herbs are not merely for pleasant smell. They help warm the body and ease the mind into restful sleep. In the medieval worldview, winter was dangerous not just because of temperature, but because of what it did to the body's humors. They believed winter cold imbalanced the body's inner forces, making people sluggish, melancholic, or restless. To counter these effects, they relied on warming herbs and stimulating drinks. She takes a pinch of crushed chamomile and sprinkles it into a small cloth pouch. She ties it shut and hands it to you. The warmth of her hand has softened the herb slightly, releasing an aroma that feels like soft blankets. She says people tuck these pouches inside their clothes or under their pillows to help the night pass more comfortably. Chamomile helps relax the muscles. Lavender calms the mind. Rosemary sharpens the breath on cold nights. The family believes these scents help them fall asleep faster, especially when the fire dies early. She leads you to the sleeping area. Beneath the top blanket, a patchwork of tiny herb sachets is arranged neatly across the bedding. Some are tied with green thread, some with red. She gently lifts one to show you how the herbs crumble slightly when pressed, releasing warm fragrances that drift into the air while people sleep. This is sensory engineering. If the air is cold, make it smell like summer. A child wanders over with a small bundle of dried mint leaves. His mother laughs and tells you that mint is their little secret for nights when the air feels heavy. When crushed, it releases a sharp, energizing scent that wakes the senses, making cold nights less suffocating. She points to a pot simmering on the hearth. It contains an herbal brew meant for drinking before sleep. She ladles some into a cup and hands it to you. The liquid is warm and slightly bitter with hints of honey. As it slides down your throat, warmth blooms in your chest like a slow sunrise. She tells you this brew is made from winter herbs dried in late autumn. Some villagers make stronger versions for those suffering from chills. A neighbor once mixed thyme, sage, and horseradish into a single pot, creating a drink so potent no one could decide if it was medicine or punishment. The father enters from the cold, carrying a bundle of dried plants he collected earlier. He shakes loose the snowflakes clinging to them and spreads them near the fire to dry. He tells you that he prefers to gather herbs personally because each plant carries its own quirks. Some dry faster, some release stronger scents. He adds a curious comment: certain herbs behave differently in deep winter than in autumn. He believes the cold strengthens their aroma, sealing the oils inside until they are warmed. The parents show you one more practice. They take a small clay bowl filled with smoldering herbs and carry it across the room. The herbs release a soft stream of fragrant smoke that drifts like a gentle fog. They walk slowly, letting the smoke circulate. It creates a warm, comforting haze that settles in the air and clings to the walls. The father says this cleansing ritual keeps sickness away and adds a layer of warmth to the cottage. It transforms the atmosphere into something intimate and protected. The healer sits beside you and adds a detail healers often debate. Some argue that medieval winter remedies came mostly from simple observation and instinct. Others believe they were influenced heavily by classical medical theory about balancing bodily humors. She shrugs and says that whatever the truth is, what matters is that people survived. She hands you one more item before you leave, a tiny cloth pouch filled with rosemary and dried apple peel. She tells you to hold it to your chest before sleeping. She says the scent remembers summer, even in the heart of winter. You pocket the pouch and stand slowly. When you step outside, the cold sweeps around you again, but now the air carries a faint promise of warmth from the herbs inside your coat. You leave the scented warmth of the healer's cottage and step back into the village lane. The night has deepened. The moon is high now, casting long, sharp shadows across the snow. The silence is heavy. You walk until the houses thin out, revealing a small meadow beyond the last row of fences. You stand in the open. A strange feeling settles over you, a sense of watching, of waiting. In a world without lanterns or streetlights, the darkness itself becomes a character. You follow the path back toward the cottages and approach one with a faint glow pulsing like a heartbeat inside. You step in. The fire here has nearly died. Only a weak ember glows like a tired eye beneath the ash. A family lies sleeping under thick blankets, their breaths rising in small clouds. But one person is awake. A teenage girl sits near the bed, wrapped in a shawl, staring at the shuttered window with wide, unblinking eyes. She nearly startles when you step quietly inside, then relaxes. She whispers that she cannot sleep, not because of the cold, but because winter nights always bring strange dreams. She hugs her knees closer. She tells you that dreams feel different in winter, heavier, slower, more vivid, as if frost touches the mind the same way it touches the earth. This is a profound psychological observation. In the deep winter, people slept for 10, sometimes 12 hours. That is a long time to be trapped in your own mind. The darkness is absolute. The silence is total. She says her grandmother used to call these intense visions winter wanderings of the mind. The girl leans closer and whispers that in this village, people believe winter dreams come from the darkness slipping through the cracks at night. She points toward the shutter. Frost curls across the edges, forming delicate branching patterns. She says the people here believe that frost carries quiet stories, shaping what the mind sees while asleep. You look at the frost. It is beautiful, fractal, and chaotic. If you stare at it long enough in the dim light, it does start to look like a landscape, or a face, or a forest. Her mother suddenly stirs in her sleep and mutters something. The girl watches her carefully. She explains that sleep-talking becomes more common when nights grow brutally cold. The father lies on the far side of the bed. His brow furrows. The girl says he dreams of wolves every winter, not attacking wolves, but silent ones standing in the snow. She turns back to you with earnest intensity. She tells you about an idea often murmured among older villagers. Long winter nights were thought to open a thin space between the waking world and the world of dreams. Not a dangerous space necessarily, but a permeable one. She gets up and urges you to follow her to the corner of the room. She lifts a small wooden box from a shelf. Inside are tiny objects, pebbles, dried herbs, feathers, 2 shells, and a tiny carved wooden figure of a bird. These are her anchors. She says these items help her sleep through winter when dreams grow too vivid. She places each object before you. The pebbles are for grounding the mind. The herbs are for calming the breath. The shells are for listening to the quiet inside herself. She takes the wooden bird and explains that her great-grandmother carved it for her. It is meant to guard her dreams, not by chasing bad visions away, but by luring gentle dreams into the room, encouraging thoughts of springtime fields and warm breezes. She presses the bird to her chest and inhales deeply, then sets it carefully beside her pillow. You realize that these rituals serve a vital purpose. They are psychological insulation. Just as the straw insulates the body from the cold ground, these small talismans insulate the mind from the vast, empty darkness of the winter night. They give her a sense of control. She lifts a thick wool blanket and invites you to feel how cold the bed has become since the fire died. You slip your hand beneath it. The air inside feels heavy and chilly. She whispers that it is during this cold moment, just before dawn, that dreams turn darkest. She calls this the hour when winter tests the spirit. She curls beneath the blanket and whispers a few calming words her grandmother taught her. They are simple phrases meant to settle the mind, rhythmic and soothing. You sit beside the bed for a few minutes. The girl's eyes droop. She yawns. Her breaths gradually lengthen, becoming slow and even. You watch her drift off. You glance one last time at the frost patterns on the shutter. They shimmer faintly in the moonlight. You understand why medieval people imagined frost carrying stories. You step outside. The cold clamps onto you immediately, but you are ready to listen. The night is not silent. It is speaking. You stand in the faint pre-dawn glow. The village around you seems half asleep, half listening. We often think of the past as silent, but winter has a specific soundscape. It is thin, brittle, and echoing. You take a slow breath. You walk along the narrow lane again. As you approach the next cottage, you pause. You hear it now. A creak, a groan, a crackle, like something slowly tearing. You step closer to a wooden fence. The sound sharpens. It is the fence itself complaining as frost tightens the wood, shrinking it, reshaping it, forcing it to speak in long, tired moans. You touch the surface. It feels rigid, as if every drop of moisture in the plank has turned to glass. You continue walking. Your boots crunch with a rhythm that almost echoes. The snow is so cold it seems crystalline, shattering underfoot rather than compressing. Each step seems louder in the thin air. You tilt your head and wait. Clink. A soft tapping from a nearby roof. Icicles breaking free and falling one by one, striking the ground with tiny crystalline sounds. A door opens quietly in the cottage ahead. An old man steps out, wrapped in a cloak, holding a small stick to test the snow. He notices you and waves you closer. His breath puffs out like a plume of smoke. He says he likes to listen to the village before dawn. Sounds tell him things that sight cannot. He gestures toward the side of his house. He points to the wooden beams supporting the roof. They creak steadily, expanding and contracting with the cold. He places your hand against the wood. You can feel faint vibrations as though the house is alive, adjusting itself carefully to survive the night. He explains that villagers recognize the difference between normal winter creaks and the dangerous kind. The dangerous ones sound almost like a cough, sharp and sudden, signaling that ice has slipped between two boards or a beam has cracked. He laughs softly and says, "Children claim the beams speak with personalities." One child insists the left beam complains more loudly than the right. Another says the roof groans only when it is lonely. He leads you behind the cottage where the path narrows. You hear another sound now, a rhythmic scraping noise. It takes you a moment to recognize it. A few huddled goats inside a shed shift in their sleep, dragging their hooves through straw. The straw rustles, creating a steady whisper. The old man explains that villagers often listen for this sound to know their animals are safe. If the goats fall silent for too long, someone wakes to check on them. A gust of wind sweeps through suddenly. It carries a lonely whistle as it snakes between the cottages. The sound rises and falls like a sad flute. The old man closes his eyes to listen. He says, "Winter winds always arrive with stories. Some bring warnings of storms. Others bring warmer weather behind them." You walk with him back toward the main lane. A crow caws somewhere overhead. Its call is sharp and hollow. It echoes strangely in the cold, as though bouncing off invisible walls. The man tells you, animals behave differently in winter nights. Crows call less often. Owls grow quieter. Dogs bark at things they barely see. Inside his cottage, His wife tells you she has always heard more in the winter darkness. She claims winter amplifies sound. It strips away background noise until even the faintest whisper becomes clear. As she speaks, you notice a sound outside, a distant crack, deep and resonant. The couple both pause. The old man relaxes. He says it is only the river freezing more deeply. Thickening ice expands and splits, creating echoes that travel across the village like muted thunder. You imagine the dark river winding beyond the cottages, slowly turning solid, calling out through the night. The woman smiles and tells you another sound to listen for. Frost cracking on the thatched roofs at dawn. She calls it the morning applause of winter. She asks you to step near the window. The frost patterns shiver slightly. She explains that frost itself can make noise. When temperatures drop sharply, frost crystals expand suddenly, creating faint popping sounds that blend into the air like tiny sighs. Her husband points at a wooden bowl filled with dried beans. He says that on certain winter nights, the beans pop slightly, not from heat, but from the dry air pulling at their shells. Then, a faint scratching sound comes from above. The man explains it is likely a dormouse or a winter bird fluttering in the rafters. In winter, all creatures search for warmth. Even mice and birds move closer to human homes. It sounds like a tiny heartbeat above you. You close your eyes and listen. Wind, frost, wood, animals, water beneath ice. The night is a symphony of survival. You leave the old couple listening to the river and step into the thinning night. Dawn is close, yet the cold deepens as if winter wishes to make one final point. You follow a narrow lane that dips between two cottages and leads toward the lowest part of the village. Here, the cold settles with particular cruelty. Frost clings to the ground in thick layers. You soon notice a cottage with no smoke rising from its chimney. Its shutters are tightly closed, and a thin crust of frost clings to the frame of the door. Something inside feels still. You step closer, lift the latch gently, and slip inside. The cottage is dark, except for the faintest gray light slipping under the door. The air is icy, so cold that you can see the condensation of each breath drifting slowly to the floor. The fire in the hearth has died completely. No embers glow beneath the ashes. This is the worst-case scenario. The family inside lies awake, bundled in blankets so thick and layered that they look like mounds of fabric rather than people. Their faces peek out with red noses and trembling chins. The mother whispers a greeting, her voice weak from shivering. She explains that the windstorm last night killed their fire before they could bank it. Too much smoke blew back through the chimney, forcing them to let the flames die. They planned to relight it at dawn, but the cold overwhelmed them. You can see the effort it takes for her to speak. Every word escapes as a cloud. Her husband lifts his head, teeth chattering. He tells you that when fire fails, families must turn to whatever they have left. They gathered every blanket they own. They covered the shutters with spare wool. They stuffed straw into the gaps near the door. You kneel beside the bundled family. Their body heat radiates faintly, but the air steals it quickly. The youngest child peeks from under a blanket, cheeks pale and lips tinted blue. He holds a small wool glove in his hand, clutching it like a talisman. The mother shifts slightly and reveals a clay jar wrapped tightly in cloth. She pulls back the layer and shows you warm coals inside. They glow faintly, no brighter than fireflies. You raise your eyebrows, surprised that they still emit warmth. She explains that her husband kept a few embers alive in the jar, protecting them with a metal lid and layers of cloth. It is not enough to heat the room, but enough to help them relight the fire once their bodies can bear the cold. This small ember jar feels like the last defense against the night that nearly claimed their strength. The father admits he almost dropped it when his hands grew numb. He laughs weakly, saying he has never felt so terrified of losing a single handful of coals. The mother pulls the blankets closer and shares a detail many villagers whisper about. When fire fails, the cold becomes something alive. She says the cold moves across the floor like an invisible fog, creeping beneath blankets and settling on the chest. You feel a wave of stillness wash over the room. Even the creaking of the walls has softened under the weight of frost. The father says that nights like this make people reconsider every habit, why they place the bed where they do, why they store warm stones next to the hearth. One error, one forgotten ember, and the cold takes control. The mother confesses something quietly. She says that when the fire dies completely, fear grows faster than frost. Fear that the night will not end. Fear that the children will not wake. You glance toward the shuttered window. Frost spreads across the wood, forming thick white lines that look almost like veins. The cold hums softly behind it. The older child speaks softly from beneath the blankets. She says she kept their puppy tucked under the covers all night to stay warm. But the puppy wriggled free and hid beneath the table. You look there and see a tiny shape curled in a tight ball, shivering gently. You scoop it up and return it to the girl, who wraps it under the blanket and holds it close. The mother explains that animals often panic when fire disappears. They can sense the change in the air. The father suddenly remarks on something scholars debate. Did most families have backup embers? Some believe people always kept a jar of coals ready. He shrugs weakly, saying all he knows is that his father taught him to save coals after losing too many fires in early winters. You help him move the ember jar closer to the hearth. The family watches with hopeful eyes. The mother hands you a bundle of dry twigs. The father gestures weakly for you to try relighting the fire. This is the moment. The room is freezing. The hands are numb. The fate of the morning rests on this jar. You lean toward the hearth. You open the ember jar carefully. You use tongs to place a single glowing coal into the center of a small nest of kindling. You blow gently. Whoosh! The ember brightens. A spark jumps, then another. The twigs begin to glow at their tips. A small flame rises, trembling like a newborn creature, uncertain of its strength. The children gasp quietly. The flame strengthens. You add another twig, then another. Soon, a tiny fire flickers in the hearth, pushing back the cold one breath at a time. Warm light spills across the family's faces. Their shoulders loosen, their eyes widen with relief. The puppy wriggles beneath the blanket. You add a thicker stick, and the flame grows brighter, stronger. The father bows his head and exhales as if releasing a weight he has carried for hours. The mother whispers a quiet thank you. The fire crackles and warmth gathers slowly in the room, like fog dissolving. You stay until you feel the temperature lift, until the frost on the shutters begins to melt into tiny droplets. Then you stand, nod to the family, and step outside into the dawn. The cold has softened. Warmth follows you now, not from a fire, but from the memory of a flame reborn in the darkest hour. You step away from the cottage, and the first pale hints of dawn stretch across the horizon like thin strokes of faded gold. The sky no longer feels like a solid sheet of iron. You walk slowly through the village as morning begins to stir. Frost cracks softly beneath your boots, but the harsh bite of darkness has faded. Smoke rises from a few chimneys as fires are coaxed back to life. You stop beside a cottage where a woman steps outside, rubbing her arms briskly. She tells you that every dawn after a brutal night feels like opening a book you feared might never be read again. You continue walking until you reach a narrow footpath leading to a small pasture. There, a handful of cows stand clustered near the fence. A stable boy approaches with a bucket in each hand. He tells you he spent half the night keeping watch over a newborn calf. It survived the cold, he says, but only because he kept it pressed against the warmth of its mother's flank. He beams with pride. Across the lane, a child opens a door and steps outside, dragging a wool blanket behind him like a cape. His cheeks are pink from sleep. His mother calls him back inside before the frost bites him. Villagers emerge in ones and twos. They stand in their doorways, breathing in the morning. Some stretch stiff arms. Their eyes still carry shadows from cold dreams, but the sun touches each face with a promise of warmth to come. A blacksmith trudges past you toward his forge. He says he lights his fire early so neighbors can warm their hands if their fires fail. You continue toward the village edge where the land slopes gently downward. From here, you can see the full stretch of fields covered in frost. The rising sun glints across the frozen surface, turning everything silver. Then you hear it, a thin crackling noise rising from the roofs all around you. The morning applause. The frost is breaking gently like tiny shards of glass as the sunlight hits it. In the distance, you see a monk walking along the road, wrapped tightly in his robe. His face is calm, serene despite the cold. His stillness reminds you of the dormitory and the discipline that shaped his night. Outside the inn, travelers prepare their horses. One man lifts a small clay fire pot from the snow. It still holds a tiny warmth inside. He grins and says the pot kept him alive last night. You move toward the last rise, overlooking the village. From here, you see smoke rising from every chimney, little banners of victory against the night. Dawn arrives like a soft blessing. Fire returns to hearths. Families wake with relief. You stand at the edge of the village as the morning light spreads slowly across the frozen fields. The cold remains, but it feels softer now. As your breath flows, you feel the tension you gathered during the long winter night begin to melt away. Little by little, the quiet of morning settles into your chest like warm ash in a hearth. Imagine pulling a comforting blanket toward your chin as the last embers of the long night settle into a gentle glow. Winter will always test the edges of human strength, yet dawn always comes. Let that rhythm soothe you now. Cold, then warmth. Darkness, then light. Struggle, then rest. You survived the deepest part of the night, and now all that remains is calm. Sleep softly now. The night is over. Morning has you in its gentle hands.